Chapter 1. The Body, 1999. A group of 5 climbers move slowly across the north face of Everest. Suddenly, one of them sees something strange on the rocks below him, something whiter than the snow. Carefully, he climbs down towards it. Then he calls his friends on his radio. "Come down here," he says. "Look at this." Coming closer, they see it is the dead body of a climber. The wind has blown some of the clothes from the body, and the skin is clean and white, like new stone. In the icy cold, it looks like the body of a man who died a few days ago. But the bits of clothes that are still on the body are old, brown and gray. Nothing like the brightly colored clothes that modern climbers wear. The body is lying face down. Above the head, the fingers of one hand are dug into the icy ground. One leg is broken in 2 places below the knee, and the other leg is lying over it. The body looks strong and healthy, they think, like the body of a runner or dancer. The climbers photograph the body carefully. Then, very gently, they touch the dead man's clothes, the hobnail boots, the trousers and shirt made of wool. How little he was wearing, they think, on this icy cold mountain. "I walk out on the street in Seattle with more clothing than he had on," one of them says. Yet here they are at 8,155 meters on Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. Who is this man? He can only be one of 2 people, they think. But which one? Then they find a name inside his shirt. George Lee Mallory, it says. But who is George Lee Mallory? Why are these climbers so interested in him? How did he die? And what happened to him before he died? Where is his friend, Andrew Irvine? And the most important question of all, was this man, George Mallory, the first man to reach the summit of Everest? Chapter 2. Dangers. The climbers do not stay long with the body, because Mount Everest is one of the most dangerous places in the world. There are many things that make it difficult to stay alive here. The most important of these is the height. The top of Everest is 8,850 meters above sea level. As you climb up the mountain, the air becomes thinner. It has less and less oxygen. Most people live less than 900 meters above sea level, where the air is full of oxygen. Above 2,000 meters, the air is thinner, and people find it harder to breathe. At 4,000 meters, it is harder still, and at 5,000 meters, most people begin to feel ill. They get headaches, feel tired, and breathe quickly all the time, like someone who has run a long way. In 1921, when Mallory first went to Everest, no one had climbed a mountain higher than 7,500 meters, and many people did not think it was possible. If climbers don't have enough oxygen, they'll be too tired to climb, they said. And they won't be able to think clearly either. So they will make stupid mistakes, forget to eat and drink or talk to people who are not there. Perhaps they'll die. But the need for oxygen is not the only problem on Everest. There is also the weather. Almost every week there are winds of 100 or even 200 kph, kilometers per hour. It is difficult to walk or even stand up in these winds. The wind can blow climbers off the edge of the mountain, thousands of meters to the valley below. Climbers sometimes sit in their tents for days, unable to sleep because of the noise, and afraid that the wind will blow their tents away. And then there is the cold. Temperatures on Everest often fall below -20 degrees, but the wind makes that feel much colder. But before anyone can climb Everest, they have to get there. Tibet in China is to the north of Everest, and Nepal is to the south. And until 1950, Nepal refused to let any foreign climbers enter their country. So the earliest climbers, like Mallory and Irvine, had to get to Everest from the north, through Tibet. And that was not easy at all. Chapter 3. Through Tibet to Everest, 1921. Until the early 19th century, nobody in the West knew about Mount Everest. People in Tibet knew, of course. They called it Chomolungma, goddess mother of the world, and to people in Nepal it was Sagarmatha, goddess of the sky. But no one in Tibet or Nepal had ever climbed the mountain. They thought that was a very strange idea. And no foreign person had ever been so far into the Himalayas. But in the 1830s, a British soldier called George Everest was making maps in North India. He made the first maps of the Himalayas and measured the height of some of the mountains. But Everest finished his work in 1843, and he never saw Chomolungma. The first British man to see the mountain was Everest's friend, Andrew Waugh. In 1852, Radhanath Sikdar, who worked for Waugh, said he had discovered the highest mountain in the world. It was measured carefully many times. Then, in 1856, Waugh said that this was the highest mountain in the world. He gave it the name of his old friend, George Everest, in 1865. But very few British people were able to enter Tibet or Nepal at that time. So it was not until 1921 that the first British expedition went to see if it was possible to climb the mountain. There were 9 British climbers on this expedition, and one of them was George Mallory. To get to Everest, the climbers had to walk 500 kilometers through Tibet. Their Tibetan porters carried everything they needed: food, tents, clothes, cameras, and climbing equipment. It was a long, difficult journey which took a month. They were always climbing. At first through river valleys with tall trees, colorful flowers and birds. Then onto a wide stony place where nothing grew. There was no sound except the wind, and all the time the air was becoming thinner. The climbers walked past Tibetan villages high up on the sides of mountains and came to Rongbuk, the highest monastery in the world, 4,800 meters above sea level. The monks in the monastery looked at the visitors in surprise, wondering why they wanted to climb the dangerous mountain. The climbers decided that the best way to get onto the mountain was to go up the East Rongbuk Glacier. From there they planned to climb to the North Col, a small flat place on the north ridge of Everest. By this time it was late in the year, and the winds were getting stronger. They had not planned to get to the summit this year, but only to look for a way up. But on 23 September 1921, Mallory, with 2 other climbers and 3 porters, climbed up the steep ice wall of the East Rongbuk Glacier. When they reached the snow ridge of the North Col the next day, they could see the summit, 1,800 meters above them. But at 7,000 meters it was difficult to breathe. and they moved slowly. And they could hardly stand up in the strong, icy winds. They would have to go down and come back next year. Chapter 4. The First Attempt, 1922. In 1922, a larger expedition returned. They brought oxygen with them this time, but the equipment was very heavy, and it did not always work. Many of the climbers wanted to climb the mountain on their own, if possible, without help. So climbing with oxygen was not popular with most of the climbers. 4 climbers set out on the first summit attempt: Mallory, Mooreshead, Norton, and Somervell. With 5 porters, they left Camp 4 on the North Col at 7 a.m. There was a terrible cold wind, and the climbers moved slowly, cutting steps in the snow for the porters behind them. They hoped to reach 8,230 meters that day, but at 7,620 meters, they were too cold and tired to go on. They found a place for Camp 5, and the porters left their loads here and went back down. The 4 men crawled into their 2 small tents to rest. But all night there was a high wind, and it was difficult to breathe or sleep. To get water to drink, they had to melt snow over a small cooker, which took a long time. Next morning, Mooreshead was ill. So Mallory, Norton, and Somervell set out at 8 a.m., leaving Mooreshead alone in the tent. They moved slowly, stopping after every few steps to rest and breathe. As they climbed, their hobnail boots slipped dangerously on the stones and rocks. In the thin air, they felt tired, more tired than any of them had ever felt before. At 2 p.m., they reached 8,227 meters, but they were still about 600 meters below the summit. So they turned back and helped Mooreshead down to Camp 3. On the way down, they met 3 more of their climbers coming up. They were the Australian George Finch, a Gurkha called Tejbir Bora, and Jeffrey Bruce, a young man who had never climbed before. Unlike the first group, Finch and Bruce liked using oxygen. They made a new camp 5 to 150 meters higher than Mallory's. But then they were caught in a storm and had to stay in their tent for 2 nights. On the 3rd day, Finch and Bruce went on, using their oxygen, to 8,323 meters. But here Bruce became exhausted and had to be helped down. Because the oxygen had been so successful, Mallory, Somervell, and a 3rd climber called Colin Crawford decided to make another attempt, this time with oxygen. But while they were climbing across a snow slope, there was a sudden avalanche. Everyone was buried under the snow. All the climbers and 7 porters managed to climb out, but 7 porters were killed. It was clear that Everest had won, this time. Chapter 5. Saving the Porters, 1924. The British climbers returned in April 1924. This time they planned to succeed. Edward Norton was the chief climber in the group of 12 men, and they had 150 Tibetan porters, both men and women, to help them. From base camp, the porters carried equipment up to Camps 1 and 2 on the Rongbuk and East Rongbuk glaciers. One woman carried her 2-year-old child on top of an 18-kilogram load from 5,300 meters to 6,000 meters. Then she carried her child back down and offered to go up again. The next part was harder. On a cold, stormy day, Mallory, Irvine, and 2 other climbers set out with 20 porters to carry equipment from base camp to Camp 3, but the weather was terrible. A strong wind blew down off the mountain, straight into their faces. The ice on the glacier was as clear and hard as glass. There were not enough tents at Camp 2, so some of the porters slept outside. Next morning they went on to Camp 3, but here it was even colder than before. That night the temperature fell to -29 degrees. The strong, icy wind blew into the tents all night, so everyone, inside the tents, was covered with snow. The storm blew for 2 more days. Many of the porters lay in their tents, not caring about life or death. At last, the storm ended, and they all went down to base camp to rest. 3 men were seriously ill. Another had bad frostbite on both feet. The porters were unhappy and afraid. "The mountain is angry," they said. "It will kill us." So on 15th May, all the climbers and porters went down the valley to the Rongbuk Monastery, where the chief monk said prayers for them. Next day the wind had gone, and the sky was clear and blue. The climbers returned to Camp 3. Then they started to climb up the steep ice wall to the North Col to make Camp 4. And once again, things went wrong. The ice was covered with new snow after the storm. There were many crevasses, deep holes in the ice, which were difficult to see under the snow. This was the place where 7 porters had died in 1922. This time, 4 people set out: Mallory, Norton, Odell, and Lakpa Tsering. They climbed carefully, cutting steps in the snow. They crossed several deep crevasses. Then, just below the North Col, they came to a steep slope about 100 meters high. It was a dangerous place. The slope was covered with new soft snow. At the foot of the slope was a wall of ice, falling hundreds of meters to the valley below. Mallory climbed slowly up the slope, while Norton and Odell held him from below on a rope. After half an hour, they reached the top and found a place for Camp 4. But all the climbers were tired. On the way down, the snow suddenly collapsed under Mallory's feet, and he fell into a crevasse. Only his ice axe, across the top of the crevasse, saved him. No one had seen him fall. He looked up, at the sky, then down, into the deep blue hole below him. One mistake here could mean death. Very slowly and carefully, he pulled his tired body up the ice wall and out onto the snow. When the climbers got back to Camp 3, they were all exhausted. Their heads ached, and they coughed all night in the thin, cold air. Next day, 3 more climbers, Somervell, Irvine, and Hazard, and 12 porters climbed the snow slope to Camp 4. Somervell and Irvine came down, leaving Hazard behind with the porters. That night it snowed heavily, and the temperature fell to -31 degrees. The exhausted porters shivered in their tents. All next day, Norton, in Camp 3, waited for them to come down. At last, he saw them coming, black dots on the snow. But only 8 porters and Hazard arrived at Camp 3. 4 porters had turned back, afraid that they would fall. So now 4 porters were alone at Camp 4. And more snow was falling, making the steep slope more dangerous than ever. Without help from the climbers, the porters would die. All the climbers were tired and ill. Mallory and Somervell had bad throats and were coughing badly. It snowed heavily all night. But next morning, Norton, Mallory, and Somervell climbed slowly up towards Camp 4. It was difficult, dangerous work. They reached the snow slope and called out to the porters above them in words like these. "Are you alive?" the climbers asked. "Can you walk?" "Yes, sir," a porter answered. "But we're afraid. It's too dangerous. If we slip, we'll fall and die." "If you stay there, you'll die of cold," Norton said. "Wait there. We're coming to get you." Very carefully, Somervell climbed across the steep slope towards the 4 porters. He had a rope round his waist. Mallory and Norton held the rope from below to keep Somervell safe. But when he was 5 meters away from the porters, Somervell reached the end of the rope. "What do I do now?" he thought. "We have no more rope, and it will soon be dark." "Come across," he called out to the porters. "It's not far. Carefully, one at a time." The first 2 porters reached Somervell safely. Then they climbed past him, holding the rope, towards Norton and Mallory. Somervell looked at the last 2 porters. "Come on," he said. "It's not difficult. One at a time." But the porters were afraid, and both started together. A second later, they slipped and fell. They slid past Somervell down the slope, towards the valley thousands of meters below. But then, a few meters from the edge of the slope, they stopped. "Don't move," Somervell said. "Just wait for me." He drove his ice axe deep into the snow. He untied the rope from his waist and passed it round the head of the ice axe. Then, holding his end of the rope with one hand, Somervell climbed down until he could just reach the men with his other hand. He pulled up the first man, then the second. They climbed along the rope to Mallory and Norton. Somervell tied the rope round his waist again and climbed back after them. Even now they were not safe. It was nearly dark, and a long way above Camp 3. One of the porters, Namgya, could not use his hands because he had bad frostbite. But at last they reached Camp 3, where 2 more climbers, Noel and Odell, were waiting with warm food. All the climbers were exhausted. Mallory and Somervell could not stop coughing, and Norton's feet hurt badly. Helping the 4 porters had made them very, very tired, and they were nowhere near the summit of Everest. Slowly, they went down to Camp 1. They needed time to rest and to decide what to do next. Chapter 6. Somervell and Norton, 1924. Norton decided that 2 pairs of climbers would try to reach the summit without oxygen. Mallory and Jeffrey Bruce would go first, and Norton and Somervell would follow the next day. The climbers would find a place for Camp 5 above 7,600 meters, and for Camp 6 at 8,231 meters. Odell and Irvine would go up to Camp 4 to help the climbers when they came down. On 1st June, Mallory and Bruce climbed up to Camp 4 with 9 porters. The next day was clear and sunny, but above the North Col they met a terrible icy wind. It was difficult to stand, hardly possible to walk. Only 5 porters continued with Mallory and Bruce. At 7,600 meters, they found a place for 2 small tents on a steep slope. Camp 5. All that night they shivered in their sleeping bags, while the wind tried to blow their tents into the air. Next morning they were all ill. Only one porter was able to go on. Sadly, they decided to come down. As they went down, they passed Norton and Somervell with 4 more porters coming up. These men reached Camp 5 and spent a better night there. The wind was less strong, and they managed to cook, eat, and sleep. It was very, very cold, and in the thin air with no oxygen, it was difficult to move. But next morning, 3 porters, Napu Yeshe, Lakpachedi, and Semchumbi, were ready to go on. They climbed on, up to 8,170 meters, higher than any man had been before. Here, at 1:30 p.m., they put up one tiny tent, Camp 6. Then the porters went down to the North Col, while Norton and Somervell got ready for the night. As it grew dark, they wondered, can a man sleep without oxygen at this height? Yes. It was the best night since I left Camp 1, Norton wrote. So at 6:45 next morning, the 2 men set out for the summit. They climbed slowly, taking 3 or 4 breaths for every step. They stayed a little below the ridge to keep out of the wind. But in the shadow of the mountain, out of the sun, it was very cold. Norton shivered all the time, and he was having trouble with his eyes. Somervell coughed a lot, and his bad throat made it difficult to breathe. By midday, they were at 8,536 meters. The view was wonderful. They were above the clouds, with a sea of mountains below them. But Somervell was exhausted. His throat was worse. He could hardly breathe. So Norton went on alone. He was moving more and more slowly, on a steep slope like the roof of a house. There were large stones and soft snow under his feet. It was easy to fall. And below him, 2,743 meters straight down in the thin, clear air, was the East Rongbuk Glacier and Camp 3. He looked up. He was about 275 meters below the summit, but they were vertical meters. Meters measured up the mountain, not along it. But he was tired and moving very slowly, and his eyes were getting worse. Sometimes he saw 2 ice axes in his hand, not one. He knew that it was possible. He could get to the summit, but he could not get back. Norton was nearer the summit than any man before him. But at 8,575 meters, he decided to turn back towards Somervell. It was the right thing to do. Halfway down to Camp 5, Somervell stopped. There was something in his throat. For nearly a minute he could not breathe at all. Then he coughed up a ball of blood and could breathe again. When they reached Camp 4, Norton could not see at all. Chapter 7. Mallory and Irvine, 1924. But to Norton's surprise, there were 2 more climbers at Camp 4, Mallory and Irvine. Mallory had decided to try again, with oxygen this time. Irvine was young, and he had not climbed many mountains, but he understood the oxygen equipment better than anyone. So Mallory decided to climb with him. On the 6th of June, they set out for Camp 5. 8 porters carried food and oxygen. Next day, they went on to Camp 6 with 4 porters. There, Mallory sent them back down with a note to Noel, who was filming the expedition. "Dear Noel, we'll probably start early tomorrow, the 8th, in order to have clear weather. It won't be too early to start looking out for us either, crossing the rock band under the pyramid or going up Skyline at 8 p.m. Yours ever, G. Mallory." Behind them, Odell climbed up to Camp 5 with food to help them when they came down. Mallory left a note for him too, asking him to wait at Camp 4 the next evening. The weather was fine, he said, but the oxygen was very heavy to carry. Odell was climbing alone, without oxygen. He spent the night at Camp 5 and then climbed up towards Camp 6. At 7,900 meters, he found some very old rocks. Studying rocks was Odell's job, and the rocks that he found showed him that Everest had once been under the sea. At 12:50 p.m., the clouds cleared above him, and he could see the summit ridge of Everest. High on the ridge, he saw two tiny black dots moving on the snow. They climbed quickly to the top of a rock step near the summit. Then the clouds came back and they disappeared. It was Mallory and Irvine, climbing strongly towards the summit. But Odell thought they were a little late. Was there enough time for them to get to the summit and then down to Camp 6 that night? He climbed up to Camp 6 and left some food for them in the tent. Then he climbed higher, towards the summit, calling out for them. But no one answered. He wondered what to do. He wanted to stay, but the tiny tent at Camp 6 was too small for 3 men. So, at 4:30 p.m., he went down. By 7 p.m., he was in Camp 4. The next day was 9th June. Odell was worried. When he looked up the mountain, he could see the tents of Camps 5 and 6, but nothing, and nobody, was moving. So Odell, with 2 porters, climbed up again to Camp 5. There was a strong wind all night. The porters shivered in their tent, and next morning they refused to move. So Odell went on alone, up to Camp 6. But no one was there. The tent was closed. The food was still there. Mallory and Irvine had disappeared. For 2 hours, Odell climbed on, above Camp 6 towards the summit. What was he thinking? Mallory and Irvine were probably dead, but perhaps, just perhaps, one of them was still alive, badly injured up there. Perhaps he could see something, or find something, and return with some answers. But he saw nothing, and found no bodies. Sadly, he turned back. At Camp 6, he went into the tent and pulled out 2 black sleeping bags. He put them on the snow in the shape of a T. It was a message to the others, far below, that Mallory and Irvine were dead. But what happened to them? Did they reach the summit before they died? Or did they turn back, like Norton and Somerville? No one knows. When Odell last saw them, it was already 12:50 in the afternoon. But they were moving quickly, he said. So perhaps they went on to the summit, and then were too tired to find Camp 6 before dark. Perhaps in the darkness, one of them fell, and the other died trying to help him. Perhaps they both fell together. Or perhaps, with no more oxygen, they were just too cold and tired to move anymore, and lay down in the snow to sleep. It was 75 years before some of these questions were answered. Chapter 8. To the South Pole, 1953. After 1950, Western climbers could no longer enter Tibet, but they could enter Nepal. In 1951, a British expedition went to the southern side of Everest for the first time. And in 1952, a Swiss climber called Raymond Lambert made an attempt on the summit with Tenzing Norgay. Tenzing was one of the Sherpa people of Nepal, who are excellent climbers and know the mountains well. Together, Lambert and Tenzing almost reached the summit, but their oxygen equipment was not working well, and at the highest camp they had no sleeping bags. So at 8,597 meters, just a few meters higher than Norton had gone in 1924, they turned back. In 1953, John Hunt came to Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, with a large British expedition. Tenzing Norgay joined them here, and the expedition set out for Thangboche, a monastery south of Everest. The walk took 17 days, and 350 porters were needed to carry their equipment. In Thangboche, they were joined by two New Zealand climbers, Edmund Hillary and George Lowe. The climbers spent 3 weeks at base camp, getting used to the thin mountain air. They climbed smaller mountains of about 6,000 meters, learning to use the oxygen equipment. John Hunt thought that Tenzing Norgay was stronger than anyone. Their first problem was to find a way up the Khumbu icefall onto the Khumbu Glacier. The Khumbu Glacier is a slow-moving river of ice, and the Khumbu icefall is a large wall of broken ice. This icefall is over 300 meters high, 6 times higher than Niagara Falls, and the ice in it moves, very slowly, all the time. There are pieces of ice as big as houses, which could fall on the climbers' heads at any moment. There are avalanches of ice that could kill a man in a second. Terrible crevasses go hundreds of meters down into the blue-green darkness under the climbers' feet. Sometimes the climbers heard ice moving far below them. The climbers and Sherpas carried loads of over 18 kilograms up this difficult route. They made Camp 2 halfway up the icefall at 5,915 meters, and Camp 3 at the top of the icefall at 6,158 meters. Then they climbed up the glacier to Camp 4 at 6,462 meters, and Camp 5 at 6,705 meters. The next big problem was to climb the Lhotse face to the South Col. High above Camp 5 is the mountain of Lhotse, 8,500 meters. To the left of Lhotse is the South Col of Everest. The first 600 meters of the Lhotse face is a steep slope of ice, the Lhotse Glacier. This ice is very difficult to climb, with many ice walls and deep crevasses. For 11 long days, the New Zealander George Lowe and the Sherpa Anulu fought their way up this wall of ice. All the way, they cut steps in the ice and fixed ropes for the others to follow them. They made Camp 6 at 7,010 meters, and Camp 7 at 7,315 meters. Then they began to climb to the left, across a wide snow slope, towards the South Col. But the weather was terrible, and they were very tired. High winds blew down on them from the South Col. After 12 days of this, George Lowe was exhausted. But on 21st May, Anulu and Wilfred Noyce finally managed to cross the difficult snow slope and reach the South Col at 7,925 meters. Next day, Hillary, Tenzing, and 17 Sherpas followed them up to the South Col. The Sherpas had only a cup of tea for breakfast at Camp 7, after a long, cold night. They were carrying loads of 22 kilograms with no oxygen. At the South Col, they made Camp 8. Then, the same day, they went down again to Camp 4. They had climbed for 10 hours with no food or drink all day. But Camp 8, on the South Col, was ready at last. Now the attempt on the summit could begin.